Hello, Toronto. Burnaby. Hello, Burnaby. We hope you have some recipes that you're going to share and maybe some food with us later today. Thank you, Port Coquitlam, for joining us. Markham, this is great. Vancouver, excellent. Hello from Kitsilano. Kung Jaadee is just getting ready in the kitchen right now. And so we'll get the webinar started in a couple minutes. Oh, hello, Brazil. We hope everything is well down there. Thank you for joining us. Oh, great. We have people from all over the world, even from London, UK. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited for this event. Thank you, Virginia. Yes. Very local is good. Hyper local, Falls Creek. Thank you for joining us. So we're just getting started in a couple minutes. Hello from West Van. And if you're joining us, wherever you're joining us from, please let us know in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Heather. Hello, Kitsilano. It's good to see people from all over Vancouver and, in different parts of the world here today. We've got a really fun and exciting event today. Anytime we can do anything about food, I'm always in. So Meadow Ridge School, oh, that's so nice. Meadow Ridge School, and I see that's in Maple Ridge. Excellent. Thank you for joining us today. So just another minute and then we're going to get started. We're just letting a few other people join us today. So we've got a good crowd here today, which is great. So if you're just tuning in right now, please let us know where you are joining us from. We'd love to know. I like that there's lots of people from Kitsilano. It's good to see people from other branches. Yes, the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thank you. Kelowna, thank you for joining us as well. Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. So I'm just going to stop sharing our slides right now, and then I'm going to do our intro. Thank you all for joining us today. Hello and welcome. My name is Candy Tanaka, and I'm the event coordinator for the Vancouver Public Library, and I'll be your host for today. My colleague Jorge is also working on this event, and he's been busy in the background behind the camera in the kitchen with Kung Jaadee, making sure that everything looks great. So please say hi to Jorge in the chat. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional and unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of the land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years and what that means for you to be where you are. If you're joining us from another part of the country or another part of the world, we have a great resource that we'll share with you in the chat so you can learn more about the land where you live. Speaking of chat, there's a quick housekeeping note that today that we want to mention to you that we can't, because we can't see you, we want you to be vocal on the chat. So here's a quick tip. Please make sure your messages are visible to all attendees. And unfortunately, by default, what Zoom does is it makes it so that your messages are only visible to the panelists. So please take a second for now and go to the blue button on the bottom of the chat box and change that to panelists and attendees. Now, the only rule that we have today about the chat is to be kind. Please respect the presenter and also the other audience members when you post a comment. Today, we're going to hear some stories about food, and we're going to get a cooking lesson. We know the idea of a virtual potluck is a bit strange, but because we can't share food or even look at each other's food on the webinar platform, but what we can share is stories about food. So at the end of the event, what we're going to do is ask if anyone has a dish or a story that they'd like to share, and we'll be able to invite you as a presenter so that we can all see and hear from you. Now, fry bread and salmon are two of my favorite things, so let's get started. Kung Jaadee, can you please join me on the stage? Kung Jaadee is a 2021 Indigenous storyteller in residence at the Vancouver Public Library.
Thank you. Kung Jaadee Hinu Hat Kifkadi Kyam. My Haida name is Moon Woman, and my cousin Crystal Robinson gave me this name at the Memorial Potluck honoring my great uncle, who was the hereditary chief of my clan in August 2008. I prefer to use my traditional name because it used to be illegal for Indigenous people to have a traditional name. My parents don't have traditional names, just me and my two younger siblings. So I feel very honored to have this name. And I'm also, I am a Maset Haida, but I'm also Squamish and Musqueam, and I'm honored that my two nations share the territory with the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation. This is such a beautiful place. I moved here exactly 2 years ago yesterday, and I'm discovering so many beautiful areas, you know, in and around the Lower Mainland. I'm very honored to be with you today to speak about Sibli Alinga. Sibli Alinga is fried bread. We've never said fried bread, we've always said fried bread. So Sibli Alinga is something that is fairly new to my people. So I was born and raised on Haida Gwaii, the land of the people. And that's where I moved from 2 years ago. My grandmothers and my mother and even my father have always made Sibli Alinga. We, when I was growing up eating it, it wasn't an everyday thing. It was a once in a while treat because fried bread isn't extremely healthy. So this isn't a health portion of my residency. I'm so honored to be the Indigenous storyteller in residence for 2021. I'm walking around with a big smile on my face all the time. And I was so excited about this part of the residency because fried bread is one of my favorite things to eat as well. And I wish I could bring you some salmon, but I will talk about salmon. I don't have enough salmon to bring, sorry, but I do have a lot of fried bread. So I went and I was looking at, I'm doing some research to find out exactly when fried bread was created. And the only search that I could find was, it was a Navajo search. So it may have started in Navajo territory and spread across Turtle Island or North America that way. I'm not exactly sure. But one of the things that I've learned is that there are many ways to make fried bread. So there are Indigenous Canadians who make something called bannock. And bannock is made with baking powder. That's the leavening agent. So I would say this is more like a quick dough or a quick rise. Fried bread or Sibli Alinga is made with yeast. So it's a basic white bread recipe. And I remember actually asking my mother when I was a little girl, Mom, can you teach me how to cook? And she asked me, can you read? And I'm like, yes. Well, you can cook. And I was ordered out of the kitchen. So I now, when I cook, I don't like anyone to be in the kitchen either. I want them to give me my space. Well, I'm talking in particular about my partner. He's very respectful, but he also doesn't like anyone in his kitchen. I tried to help. So when I got married and started having my family, I really, really wanted to make some fried bread. I would say, Sibli Alinga Hanska Dikudangang. I'm wishing for fried bread. So I remember calling up my mom to ask her for her recipe. And she just told me to take any white bread recipe and to use that. So at that time, the recipe that I used, and the recipe I used today, was on the Rogers flour, the unbleached flour. And I don't know if it's even in existence. I haven't seen it for a long time, but she told me to let it rise once and then punch it down. So I'm going to take my dough that I have here in this bowl. And I can actually show you. I'll hold the dough. Can you see the dough? And this is just a small portion. And what I would do is when I'm punching it down, I would take it right here onto the surface and punch it down and push it away from me and turn it a quarter clockwise and turn it away and punch it down like this. And then I would let it rest. So for about 15 minutes, I let it rest in this little round ball. Sometimes I cover it. Sometimes I make sure that it's covered with oil so that it doesn't dry out. And after it's rested for 15 minutes, then I take pieces. This is rested for a very long time. I'll take a piece, and now I just take a very small piece because I let it rise. I let my bread rise again a little bit because I like my fried bread a little bit more light and fluffy. And then I'm just stretching the dough out. You can see I'm stretching the dough out. So just stretching it between my hands. And that's a piece. It seems very small, but I figure if I make it small, then I can eat more. And then I just break off another piece of dough. And I want my dough to look fairly nice. It kind of goes a little bit raggy looking, I guess. So I try to push those ends in a bit. My mother can make this very nice. I think my father can make it look very nice too, but please don't tell my dad. My mom's fried bread is the best. So I hope Dad isn't listening. So I'm turning it in a circle and I'm pressing it pretty flat. So it looks very flat, but there is a lot of yeast in there and it will rise. And I don't let it rise very long because I use the quick rise yeast. It only needs 5 minutes or so. And so what I do is I put it on a pan like this. The pan is usually oiled. I might put this into my cold oven because I have some boiled water in there to keep it steamy, and that steam allows the dough to rise again. So I did that. I put that boiling water in the oven when I first made my dough so that the bread could be extra fluffy. So I'll put that aside. So some people might think that I'm deep frying my bread, but I'm not. I only have a little layer, a shallow layer of oil. And I turn my burner on about medium. So it's about maybe number 3 or number 4 on my stove, or about medium heat. It's going to be different if you have gas. Gas is the best. It cooks evenly. So once my oil is hot, I put the dough in. I just put it in and then I let it cook for a few minutes. I just sort of watch to see if it's browning on the outside, and then I flip it. I just flip it once. And then we serve it. We serve it with butter. We serve it with jam. We serve it with maple syrup. So we have some jam. We have some barigay, jam, barigay. Sibli alinga kwangang, a whole lot of fried bread. So I like to make it nice and golden on each side. Sometimes it's a little darker, but that's good too. It's best served hot. It's best served the same day. I know that some people might do like maybe a cinnamon sugar when it's hot. You can dip it in like that if you're, I've never done that. If I had salmon, canned salmon or jarred salmon, I would take some of that salmon and mix it up with a little bit of mayonnaise and a little bit of the oil from the salmon that's jarred up, and maybe a little bit of pepper, and then mix it up really well. And I would spread that on top. Kutskit lagang tastes good. I would say for salmon, we could say chin diku lagang. I like salmon or I like fish. Chin hanskadigu dangang, I'm wishing for fish. Sibli alanga diku lagang, I like fried bread. Sibli alanga hanskadigu dangang, I'm wishing for fried bread. So this is my fried bread. This is sibli alanga. So even though it's fried in oil, we still slather it in butter, but it's got to be butter. I mean, if you can't have butter, margarine is a good substitute. You can have it with jam. My Katai, my sweetheart, likes peanut butter. And it's all up to you. I also like to have it with butter, and I like to have it with maple syrup. So I want to take a look and make sure. So one of the things that happened with my people, so I'm sure it's the same for the Squamish and the Musqueam people, as well as the Haida. So what happened was Europeans came into our territory and they brought diseases like tuberculosis, measles, influenza, and smallpox. And these diseases killed the ancestors. Not all of them, but there were more than 20,000 Haida ancestors living on Haida Gwaii before contact. And after contact, there were 588 between the villages of Skidegate in the south and Auklagay or Old Masset in the north. And there were about 400 that had migrated to Alaska by 1862. And so soon after that, missionaries came into our territories and converted the survivors to Christianity. And after that, even the traditional food gathering practices were closely monitored by the Indian agent and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So the restrictions were put into place. And so that meant there was less food. So Indigenous people everywhere have always only gathered enough food to feed the family. They wouldn't hoard food, and they would share food with elders who couldn't gather food anymore. And then, so in this case, what would happen is food would be offered as trade or as staples to our people. So some of those things were white flour, white sugar, yeast, black tea. These are some of the things that would be offered. And we don't have a history of my ancestors using any kind of bread before contact. So somebody taught my ancestors how to make white bread dough, and somehow they managed to create the fried bread, which I totally love and I'm grateful for. But again, this is a very once in a while treat. The last time I made this was a year ago. That's how often I make it. Maybe once a year, that's it. And just go crazy and enjoy it. I think I said everything that I needed to say, that I wanted to say about fried bread. I was going to talk about how I realized that we're in a pandemic. We're in a pandemic for a while yet. Originally, I wished that we could have an actual potluck and talk about the foods that we've prepared, what it means to us, if this was something that we grew up eating, if it was something our grandparents or our great-grandparents made, or if it was something Uncle so-and-so made or Aunt so-and-so made, if it was a recipe passed down, or if it was something that just spoke to us once we got to live on our own or have our own families, and maybe we discovered something that our children or maybe our nieces or nephews totally loved, and we just adopted it as a favorite recipe. So I was going to open it up as a point where we could talk about our different dishes. And then once we told our stories, then we were going to dig in and share the food. So I'm hoping some of you have prepared a dish so that you can speak about it and we can drool. So I told you about Simply Alling. Are there any that's online right now who have created something? Or if you haven't created something, did you want to speak about a dish that is part of you and your family, or maybe it's something that you just enjoy on your own? Okay. That sounds good. Mmm. That's very good. All right, am I still muted? Okay. Okay, so in the chat, I noticed somebody had mentioned that in England, they do fried bread with a bit of bacon fat. I think this is something Dinan Kayas, my great grandmother, had done. She used to save all her bacon fat and use that to cook in. And somebody else shared about how they still use their mother's lasagna recipe. So for my fried bread, I used a bit of yeast, so about 2 tablespoons of yeast in half a cup of water. The water I made very hot, and I put a teaspoon of honey, and I mixed it very, very well. So the honey dissolved in the water, and I poured the water over top of the yeast and let the yeast sit for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And then in my larger bowl, I have a much larger silver bowl. Oh, maybe this is it right here. I just didn't recognize it. The Simply Alling is in it. I took 3.5 cups of hot water and put it right into the bowl. And I was supposed to use four teaspoons of salt, but I thought it was a lot of salt. So I used 3, and it wasn't enough. So I'm going to make a note of this in my recipe book to put all the salt in, because when I tasted my bread, I thought it tastes good, but it needs salt. And half a cup of oil. and 2 tablespoons of lemon juice. So I'm just going on my memory, but I don't know why my memory is so sharp today. I guess because I've made this recipe like, I don't know, hundreds of times while my children were growing up. I mean, because I used to make it for their school, for fundraisers, and they might complain then because they would only get like 1 piece each instead of 2. But also, I'd mix that very well so the salt dissolved, and then I would add the yeast mixture, and then I'd start adding about 9.5 cups of white flour, and mix it very well until it's starting to pull away from the bowl, and then I'll turn it onto a very well floured board and start kneading it for about 20 minutes. And then I would put it back into my bowl with a lot of oil, and then turn it so that the top was covered with oil so it stays nice and moist. It's okay if you don't make any food according to what your cultural background is. It's quite all right. Like really, I have adopted a lot of things that aren't part of my culture. So while my children were growing up, for example, we're not Jewish, but I remember that when it was Hanukkah, for some reason, I guess I decided to make latkes or potato pancakes. I even had to find the matzah meal to make it, but there's no one that's Jewish in my family and not in my ex-husband's family either. But it was just an experiment, and really it was to introduce my children to the fact that other cultures exist in the world, because we also introduced them to sushi. It was all vegetarian. We raised our children as vegetarians, and also a red lentil dal. And so that's like a split red lentils. All these dishes became something that was a favorite of mine. I don't know if my children liked it at all, but I really wanted to eat delicious food. So I tried to figure out ways that I could bring the world into my home so that my children would be exposed to something that was really quite different from what might be something that we'd grow accustomed to, and they would be willing to try something that had a little bit of spice in it, or a whole bunch of herbs, or it just came from the other side of the world, and we would actually do research and try and figure out what these dishes meant. And we'd tell them, we'd talk about it with them. And thankfully, they were all pretty good eaters. We had to warn the 2 older children to keep their mouths closed if it was something that they didn't like, because the youngest sibling would decide they didn't like it either, according to what the 2 older siblings decided. So we had to tell them to keep their mouths closed. If they didn't like it, they could nibble whatever they wanted, and then they could go and make their own sandwich afterwards. We strongly felt like we weren't living in a restaurant, and we weren't going to make something different or special for our kids. Number one, we couldn't afford it. And number 2, whatever we were making was enough for leftovers for the next day, which was a bonus because we were a very busy family. And it was really great to be able to have that chance to teach our kids a different way. So my eldest child ended up growing up and traveling around the whole world and learning other languages, and just being open to learning about other cultures. And I'm really glad that he's like that. I think in a lot of ways, he's a lot like I am. And in that process, he did end up coming back to Canada, and he's finishing up a degree. And he's a pretty good cook too, I must say. Oh, that's awesome. So in Colombia and Venezuela, they're talking about making arepas. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, with corn flour, and the shape and size is almost exactly like my fried bread. That's awesome. It's not fried, but grilled. And the Colombians eat them as is or with cheese and butter. In Venezuela, they are filled with any number of ingredients. North America or South America, we continue to make food that we learned from our ancestors. Yes, yes. And I totally love that. I'm so grateful for that recipe that's shared right there. So what I learned about making this recipe with the 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, it actually acts as a natural conditioner for the dough. It keeps the dough really nice and soft. You can't taste the lemon juice when you have made the fried bread, or I usually don't make this much fried bread all at once. Usually it's just a few pieces to feed whoever is at home. And the rest of it I shape into loaves and let that rise again. And then I bake it. So we have a few loaves of bread, usually 3 loaves of bread. It makes about 4 loaves altogether. And that way we're not eating so much sabli alanga, because I think this would be just a little bit too much. But of course, it would be a wonderful feast. I think I tried this once with my children, where I just made the whole batch as fried bread, and they actually had a sore stomach later on in the day. But I warned them beforehand. I said, don't eat too much. You could always put it in the fridge or freezer. I think the freezer would be better to take for a snack the next day at school or at work or whatever you want to do, because it will go stale pretty fast, just as it is sitting on the counter. It will taste okay. It won't be bad or anything like that. It just won't be as good. Yeah, so salmon is a staple amongst many coastal indigenous peoples. And I know for a lot of non-indigenous peoples as well, people love salmon. And I grew up on it. My dad was a fisherman the whole time I was growing up, and he was an excellent provider. And, you know, today I certainly appreciate that. And I thank my father and my mother, because my mother is a superb cook. We make a fish casserole called, we call it fish hash, but it really is just like, my mom makes it with potatoes and carrots. She boils the potatoes and carrots and then mashes them with some salmon. So often that's jarred salmon or canned salmon, and a bit of salt, pepper. She uses a little bit of pickle. So that's just like a regular pickle. It's not a dill pickle, it's just a regular pickle, and a little bit of mayonnaise. And she mixes that all up together and puts it in a pan and bakes that until the top is golden. So it's a very simple recipe. And when I make it, it tastes okay. But when my mom makes it, oh, it's out of this world. I just cannot replicate it. I could watch her and see her use the same. She doesn't do anything different. She doesn't leave anything out when she tells me the recipe. And I follow her directions. And mine is just, it's okay. But mom's is the best. I don't know why, but I guess I know why. She reminded me when I was complaining to her about something that I made that tasted good, but it didn't taste as good as she makes it. And she said, well, you haven't been making it as long as I have. So I have been baking, and since I was a young girl, maybe I was 9 or 10 years old. But my mom is a lot older, and she started baking when she was 5. So there is a big difference. I have some catching up to do. Maybe by the time I'm her age, maybe when I make these dishes, I'll eat it and say, it's just the way mom made it. So I did grow up eating salmon. My dad would go fishing. He'd bring home some fish. We would have it fresh. It would be pan fried. It might be baked. If it was smoked fish, because my dad used to smoke it, he had his own smokehouse. That would be cut into smaller pieces and then steamed a little bit or boiled for just a little while in a pot. And that would be, we'd serve that with boiled potatoes. I do remember boiled potatoes and salmon. We did eat it a lot. We also ate a lot of shellfish. I guess we were really poor. I mean, I didn't know it. I never went hungry because my dad was such a great provider. Whatever he got while he was fishing, he'd bring it home and that's what we would eat. But he also gathered a lot of food with my mom. So they would go and dig for clams on the beach. When there was wash up, there'd be scallops. He would trade to get abalone. This is something I didn't get to, I haven't eaten since I was a girl because settlers on Haida Gwaii over-harvested that food. So I miss it actually because I haven't tasted it since I was about 14 years old. I grew up on this very rich diet and I feel so grateful for this diet because even in the middle of winter, we would have the jarred salmon and it would be cooked like jarred in the jar with the bones intact. So the jarring process would soften those bones so much that when my parents were cooking it, they would mash the bones in with the fish completely. So we would get extra calcium that way. And I'm talking about this because yesterday I had a really, really bad fall very close to the library in the crosswalk. I landed on the pavement and I really hurt myself. But I actually ended up thanking my father later because if I didn't have this foundation of salmon and salmon bones, because we also did eat a lot of salmon, like soup, like a fish soup. There was halibut, of course, and there was also red snapper. I remember also octopus. Getting such a diverse diet, it ensured that my bones are very strong. So I thank my dad and I said, thank you to mom too, because she's not on social media, and for providing me with such a healthy foundation in my life. Because if I didn't get that, I probably would be standing here with something broken right now instead of bruises. I'm so happy. What can I say? My dad, his smokehouse blew down a number of years ago, and he didn't put it back up. So what he has done is he ends up buying commercial smoked salmon, which it pales in comparison to what my dad used to make. And I know he notices that, and he doesn't eat as much of it as I think he would if he did it himself. So my father is very particular about how he prepares his food. He doesn't smoke it too much. He just smokes it a little bit. I wish I got to see what he had done so that I could tell you exactly what he did. But in his smokehouse, he does leave a bit of a gap at the top so the smoke can actually go out. He doesn't make the building completely sealed shut because he said, otherwise it's going to get too smoky to eat. And I have tasted salmon like that, where it just tasted like smoke. I couldn't even taste the fish at all. But my father just does it just a little bit. It's just absolutely perfect. We actually call this, like salmon candy. Jilts is in our dialect, in Old Masset dialect, we call it jilts, and Skidegate in the Southern Village, they call it jilty. And it is a favorite. Like my mouth is watering as I'm thinking about it right now, because you just break it off into pieces. You can just eat it because it's completely dried and so tasty. Yeah. What can I say? If you get an opportunity to taste the salmon like that, I highly recommend it. You'll totally love it. What can I say? I wish I had some to show you, but I don't have any. Maybe in other parts of BC, there are people that know how to prepare the fish like this. I didn't stay in my hometown long enough while I was raising my children to actually learn how to do this. And like I was telling you earlier, I raised my children as vegetarians, but when we went back to visit my parents, we would eat the salmon, of course, or the halibut, or whatever happened to be in season at the time. We would always eat it. My parents make the best clam chowder. It is so very tasty. And I'm allergic to shellfish, but I still eat it. It's so good. I can't help it. Yeah. Where someone is waiting to visit Haida Gwaii for when the pandemic is over. And whatever traditional foods you can get an opportunity to taste, I recommend all of it. There is a traditional cook in Skidegate. I think her name is Roberta Aitken, or Kanawi. I think it's Kanawi's Kitchen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm hoping she's still producing food. Her food is heavenly. It's, you know, I've got to tell you, so one of the things that I remember having at home, there's a music festival in early August. It's called the Edge of the World Music Festival. And I guess it was held virtually last year. It's probably going to be virtual again this year. But when it's actually on, I do remember they actually hired Kanawi or Roberta to do the catering for the artists. And I just remember tasting her halibut soup. We call it jam. And it was so very tasty. I mean, I don't know what she did. It looks very simple. So there was some halibut and some potato and a bit of onion, and there's the broth. And that seems to be about it. But it's heavenly. As soon as you bite into it, you just totally love it. So when you go to Haida Gwaii, if you get a chance to be in Skidegate for a little while, I would check out Kanawi. There might be some people in the northern end that are doing traditional foods as well. I know that sometimes the Davidson family might have like dinners and then a performance. So the whole family gets together, and I think there's only one cook, and then but the family members that come and help to serve and stuff like that, they'll put on a dinner as well. And I haven't been there, but I know their food is fantastic. So if whatever they're serving, I highly recommend it because they've lived there forever. They know how to prepare that food, and it's absolutely phenomenal. You won't be disappointed. Are there any questions by any chance? Did I miss something? I wanted to make sure that I got everyone. Everything is okay? Perfect. I wish I could give you a piece of my fried bread. Maybe you will make something today and you will enjoy it. And in the future, maybe we'll get to see one another and we'll get to eat something similar to this together. I would enjoy that very much. I know that our pandemic is on for a while yet. Please be safe, everyone. I know that it's affecting each and every one of us in some way, shape, or form. Even on Haida Gwaii, there were many cases of COVID. A few people had to be medevaced. But now they're vaccinating everyone on Haida Gwaii, which is really great news. And I know my parents had their first vaccine, and I know that even though I've had my vaccine, I'm still wearing my mask and I'm still going to stay in my bubble. And I'm going to do video calls with the people that I absolutely love, and because I want them to stay safe. I want to stay safe. I haven't visited with my children. I miss them dearly, but it's the same thing. I really want them to stay as safe as possible, and I want to stay safe. So one of the things that I love to do is I love to take a walk. I love to walk where there are trees, and I like to hug those trees if I get a chance. Now, I know my boyfriend thinks I'm a little bit silly. He's like, that's just an urban tree. I'm like, we live in a huge city. We're not going to be able to go into the forest where we are. And so I'm going to hug this tree today because I can't hug anybody else. Or I'm going to hug myself and I'm going to say, I got you. You're all going to be staying safe. Dalang di koyadang, I love you all. Dalang di koyada gigang, I love you all forever. Daman ang pango, look after yourselves. Hausan dalang kangsang, I will see you all again. I'll just check and see if there's something.
Thank you so much, Kung Jaadee. I think there was one question about a book that you found. I'm wondering if maybe you can share some information about that. Oh, hi, Kung Jaadee. Yeah, there was one question. Yeah, there was one question about a book that you found, Kung Jaadee. Yes, there was one book that you found or something, and we're wondering if you have any information on that. Was it a book with recipes or something? There was a question in the...
It's my own book.
Oh, great.
This book I bought at the store. It's called Fried Bread, or just Fry Bread. And I got that, I'm just trying to remember, Iron Dog Books. Yeah, Iron Dog Books.
Okay, great. Thank you all for joining us.
Here. It's in my office.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us online today. Thank you, Kung Jaadee, for sharing your stories and recipes with us. If you like this event, we have one more event left with Kung Jaadee before her residency ends. On Thursday, April 29th, we'll be hosting the finale where Kung Jaadee is going to talk about the smallpox epidemic and how it's decimated the Haida Nation and draw some links between the current pandemic that we're in right now. To see the details, we're going to share a link to the residency on the webpage where you can read about it. Also, we'd love for you to give us some feedback about this event. As a public institution, our job is to do programs for you, so your feedback is very important to help us get better at doing these events. We're going to share a link to a form in the chat, and if you could fill that out, we'd very much appreciate it. On that note, I want to end this event by telling you about another exciting event coming up soon. Tomorrow, on Friday, April 16th, exactly 1 week before the Oscars, we're hosting an event called the Black Oscars, about what the Academy Awards tell us about race. That event is going to be with Elaman Abdelmohoud, who is a CBC host, podcast host, and a pop culture writer for BuzzFeed, and Professor Frederick Gooding Jr. from Texas Christian University. So that's it for today. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm going to wave goodbye now and disappear, but we are going to keep the event open for a few minutes in case you want to click on some of the links that we shared. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.